Hey guys, Damian Kristof here, working with Kyle Brock to help you understand more about the gastrointestinal system. A lot of people are confused by it. You hear things like leaky gut, hear things like intestinal permeability, hear lots of things around food intolerance, FODMAP, gluten sensitivity, casein, dairy, whey, all those sorts of things. And so Kyle explains the complexities of all of that beautifully. But there's a big gap, and quite often I find that people don't really know how the digestive system actually does work. And so I thought that I would just take maybe 5 to 10 minutes of your time just to talk about how it actually all does work. And so we'll just draw a little picture. I'm probably the worst cartoonist you've ever seen, so I'll do my best. I've got a blue texture and a green texture. I think I'll use the blue, but we'll see. I might use the green when we get down to talking about the other end. What do you reckon? I might use brown. All right, so we're going to start with where digestion starts. Now, interestingly, digestion starts the moment you start to think about food. So if you think about a tomato, if you think about a steak, if you think about an apple or an orange, immediately your brain's sending signals down to your gastrointestinal system. Now, it sends messages down to your gastrointestinal system via your spine. This is very, very important because a lot of people think, oh, it just must magically happen. The key thing about keeping your spinal health good is that the communication from the brain to the rest of the body maintains potency or integrity. A lot of people wait till their back's in pain or wait until they've had an injury before they do anything about their spine, and that's probably one of the worst things you could do for your spine. You wouldn't clean your teeth when you've got a cavity, or you wouldn't wait to go see the dentist until your teeth fall out. The idea is that you go see your chiropractor to make sure your spine's in great shape before there's a problem. Now, if you've got poor signalling, there'll be problems. So just keep that in mind, because when you think about food, up here in the brain, that's a little brain, that's a very little brain, but that there is a brain. Up here in the brain, you'll be sending messages down through the spinal cord out at different segments or levels, spinal levels, to get information out. Now, when you think about food, the electricity goes on inside the brain, sends messages down through to the pancreas, to the stomach, to actually allow digestion to kick off and get started. So even before you've started eating, you'll be thinking about the sorts of foods that you're going to be eating, and that'll be triggering your body to secrete enzymes. Food comes in through the mouth. So let's say here's the mouth. We'll do a little circle there or a half circle there for the mouth. Food's going to come into here and be hit by the tongue. When the tongue hits the food, it starts to mash it up, lubricate it with saliva, and the saliva starts the digestion of carbohydrate and protein. So you need the saliva with enzymes in it to be able to do that. It's very important to maintain adequate saliva levels. And there's conversations around whether or not you should drink with your meals or not drink with your meals. I'm not going to go into that in this particular video. That can be something else you can see in another video session, maybe with Kale or myself, talking about that as well. But food must go into the mouth. You must chew it. It's very important to masticate your food. If you don't chew your food, you don't break it down to be small enough. The challenge with doing that is that you rely too much then on lower parts of your digestion to digest all of that food. So it comes into your mouth, it then goes down via your esophagus into something called the stomach. And now I know that all of you have experienced the fullness of the stomach, but there's a little sphincter here, and that little sphincter stops food from going down. It also stops food from going up. This particular sphincter is very, very important, because in the esophagus and in the stomach, there's two very different types of tissue. And the reason why there's two different types of tissue is because they perform different functions. Lots of muscles in the esophagus to control things, to get them to go down. But the tissues in here are very, very non-acid resistant, whereas the tissues in the stomach are very acid resistant. They behave differently. You don't want acid running up into the esophagus. Food should come down into the stomach, jump into kind of a pit of acid, and then get digested. This area up here is called the fundus, and the fundus, let's just mark that with an F, because it's hard to draw on the side. That's the fundus. The fundus fills up with gas. Now, in the unlikely or the unusual event of not digesting your food properly and you have a burp, it's usually because the fundus is filled with gas and is now pushing air back up through the esophagus. Some people will experience a rise of acid splash up through the esophagus, and that's called heartburn, indigestion, or reflux. Quite often what will happen is, because that's caused by a low acid environment, and it causes fermentation and putrefaction in the gut, you'll find that this fundus area will stretch up underneath your left lung, causing so much pressure that it feels like you're having a heart attack. Many people describe that as a lot of pain. That there is a problem. That's a problem. That's caused by low acid, and it gives us acid reflux. What many people then do is take antacids, which makes the problem worse. So in the Heal Your Gut events that Kale has done around Australia and will continue to do, and throughout his programs he runs with the gut, he talks about how to heal that and get that right. So it's an important thing to get that sorted out. Anyway, your food should get digested to at least kick off in both the mouth, then down through the esophagus. Bits and pieces of absorption take place in the esophagus, particularly with B12, happens in the mouth and in the esophagus. And then we go into the stomach, and you digest this bolus of food, and it should get really soft before it enters the small intestine. Now, the small intestine nerve supply and the stomach nerve supply is at around about T6. Is that pretty good writing? T6, off to the side like that. Now, those nerves signal up to the brain to say that things are happening. The brain signals down to say, hey, do some things. And food will only come through this sphincter. It's called the pyloric sphincter. This sphincter here remains closed most of the time until the food is ready to be able to be small enough to pass through the small intestine, which is about 6 feet long, which is reasonably long. But when you spread that out and when you stretch it out to its maximum capability, so there's no more ridges in it, it will span the whole width, the whole half of a tennis court. So the surface area of the gastrointestinal system is equivalent to half a tennis court, which is amazing. You can imagine what happens when you spread out all of your meal over one half of a tennis court, how much that's going to be affected and digested and absorbed. It's quite incredible. It's this area here that's affected by leaky gut. And that's where Kale talks about the fly screen scenario, the fly screen phenomenon. If you've got a bat or a bird that flies through a fly screen, that's kind of like a big piece of undigested protein punching holes through your intestines and lets the flies in, which we're trying to keep out. So that's very, very important. Now, before we let food into the small intestine, other parts of digestion need to be stimulated. And so we've got a couple of little things here. We've got a little pancreas. So the pancreas is kind of shaped like that. There's a pancreas, and then we've got a liver. Hope you're keeping up with me because you can't undraw this. We've got a liver here, and then off there you've got a little gallbladder. And the gallbladder its job is to hold onto and to dehydrate bile salts or bile acids that are made by the liver. The liver makes those by removing toxins and waste from the bloodstream through its filtration process. But the pancreas secretes enzymes. Now the pancreas secretes enzymes in relationship to protein, fat and carbohydrate, and all of that gets dumped into this area here in the duodenum, which is just after the pyloric sphincter. So once you've digested with hydrochloric acid in the stomach, you'll then start to digest for the next 6 feet with enzymes from the pancreas and bile salts from the gallbladder. Now, some people have been unfortunate enough to have their gallbladder removed, and that'll affect your fat metabolism. Some people have had tonsils removed, some people have had appendix removed, some people have had adenoids removed. These here are all part of the alimentary tract and all part of the immune system. Now, once you've had those removed, you can't get them back, they're gone. And so your digestive system and your immune system's altered forever as a result of that. So it's always good to try to hang on to those things. Anyway, food will pass down through the small intestine and continue to be digested into smaller and smaller pieces, and bacteria will start to grow on that sort of food. Not a whole lot of bacteria actually happens in the small intestine. Most of the bacteria is going to be happening in the colon, and at the end of the small intestine empties into something called the cecum, and we go through the cecum and the intestines. Off the edge of the cecum there is the appendix. Some people don't think that's essential, so they take that out, but again, that there is your immune system for food as it's being digested before it enters the large bowel, which is in fact smaller than the small bowel. But this here is where you start to dehydrate all of your food. Most of your absorption is done in the small intestine. Water and other small nutrients are absorbed in the large bowel. And this is where bacteria and putrefaction and digestion of finer little bits and pieces, mounting your immune response and all that sort of stuff takes place. So your probiotics, etc., live primarily in this area here. Some people have what's called an open ileocecal valve, which is here. There's a little valve here, and that can be felt. You can actually feel that, and that can cause refluxing of fecal material back up the small bowel into the large bowel into the small bowel. That will cause symptoms of SIBO, and you don't want SIBO. Kale talks about that in his programs. Anyway, food's going to go up the ascending colon, across the transverse colon, and it leaves via the descending colon. Interestingly, the little sphincter that's at the bottom end at your anus, so here's the rectum, here's the anus, the sphincter that's there can sometimes be injured by injuries on the coccyx. So some people, many people I hear, so I had a fall on my backside when I was little, and as a result I injured my coccyx, and ever since then things haven't been good, and I haven't been able to move my bowels properly, and often that's an injury. It doesn't have to be fractured, but it can be an injury. We call that a subluxation, and chiropractors can deal with all of that. And so we look at the nerves associated with the digestive system, but via the spinal cord. So it's important to see your chiropractor to make sure that your spine is working well, because it assists in the health of the whole of your body in that regard from a nervous system perspective. However, you'll get signals when all of this here gets filled up, which is about the length from your wrist to your forearm. That's how long this part is, and that there will be dumping out all the stuff that was up here all the way out. And it should be in one big long log, and Kale will talk more about that with you at another time. That's the gut. That's how it works. From this hole to that hole, all the digestive process takes place, and it's very, very important that all of it's working very, very well. It's very, very important to make sure the nerve supply is right, the bacteria levels are right, that you're not fermenting, not farting, not bloated, not having runny poos or too hard poos. Make sure you're hydrated. And of course, all of this is part of Kale's program. It's been great to share with you. I'm Dr. Damian Kristof.